All right. We are back live with the Healthy Indoors live show. I'm your host, Bob Krell. I'm the founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors magazine, and I'm really happy that you can all be joining us today. Some of you will be seeing us live, some of you won't. We are live streaming to the Healthy Indoors online global community, as well as healthyindoors.com, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and a host of other places. So it's really great to have you here. We haven't been on a pause for the show, I guess, for a bit. I guess the best way to describe it is we took a pause since last fall. So this is really our debut official weekly show. We'll be here every Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. So we look forward to having you join us. If you are watching the program live now on the Healthy Indoors Global Community, you would be able to comment. So there's a comment chat box in there, and by all means, type some chat in there. If you have questions for our guest today, we'll be able to get those on air. And certainly after the fact, the recordings and the podcast will be available, and you can post comment after the show is over and done and just in recording mode. So anyway, I'd like to, with any further ado, to welcome our two guests here today. From ICP, we have Cole Stanton, who is the Director of Education, and Josh Trauman, who's the Director of Sales, directing.
Hey, Bob. How are you?
Hi,
Hi,
guys.
Bob.
It's funny.
Thanks for having us. I didn't realize this was the inaugural Back in Action show. So
It is because I
honored.
took a very long pause. These things happen.
Right.
And yeah, it was funny because we just saw each other several weeks ago. I mean, during the pandemic, we haven't, nobody's seen anybody, but we were all just down at the AIHce show in Nashville,
Yes.
2, 3 weeks ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a great show. It was great.
Great
was.
show. Good to see everybody back.
Come back.
Yeah. So, the topic of today's show is pretty straight up. We're talking about, we're hitting hurricane season now, right? Officially, I guess, at least in North America, June is it, right? That's the beginning of it.
June 1st to November 30. Yep.
Yeah. So that being said, we're what can we be doing to be better prepared this year? I've got a whole list of comments I want to get into and topics, but I'm going to kick it out to you guys. What should we be doing as an industry? What should practitioners be doing? What should even the people in the general public be doing? So start at a good entry point there. I'll let Cole take the lead on it because he'd love to. I know
Well,
it. Well,
it's a La Nina season. So we're expecting, I think, 14 or so storms, 14 to 21, of which 3 to 6 might be category 3, 4, or 5. And that comes from NOAA, from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And it comes from their guide to the media for how to actually try and intelligently talk about storm season. So La Nina means above average temperatures in the Atlantic. And it means NOAA is about 70% confident that forecast will come through. So it is not a staggeringly scary storm season, but it's not a mild prediction either. And I think we can all do better at being prepared before we're all of a sudden boots on the ground and wondering what we're supposed to be doing. This is really better described as a storm planning business than a storm chasing business. And actually, Josh wrote an article on this a year or so ago. So, Josh, I'll kick to you to add to that.
Yeah. So, one thing that we've all been experiencing for the past 2-3 years now is extreme constraints on raw materials, as well as supply chain, transportation, personnel, employees, etc. So with all of that in mind, this year, more importantly than ever, is preparing early, making sure that you have all of your supplies well stocked. If you're a distributor, making sure your warehouses that are in those areas where folks are going to be grabbing things due to storms, Gulf Coast, Southeast, etc., are well stocked. Not only from a disinfectant and coatings perspective, which Fiberlock and Benefect under the ICP umbrella obviously manufacture, but things like PPE and respirators and dehues and air movers and moisture meters, all of those tools in the toolbox that will be important. Making sure you've got those well stocked. And then, from a distributor perspective, and then from a contractor perspective, making sure your shelves are well stocked when you do get those calls and you're ready to go, and you don't have to wait for your local distributor to provide those materials. Many of our top distributors throughout the U.S. set up mobile warehouses once storms do come into an area, so there'll be quick boots on the ground prior to the storm arriving, usually looking for a real estate warehouse space where they can set up shop. Many of the distributors also already have shops throughout the Southeast and warehouses in key locations where storms would normally hit as well.
I mean, Cole mentioned, that this is we're predicting, at least NOAA's predicting, this is going to be a fairly rough season. Maybe and that El Nino, or is it La Nina? El Nino?
It's a La Nina
La
this
Nina.
year.
And that type of cycle happens somewhat frequently, right?
Mhm.
It's not an unprecedented event, but we're certainly coming off of a situation where we had all of our supply lines super stressed during the pandemic, right? Last couple of years, especially 2020, it was everything kind of fell apart for a little bit. So with that in mind, has the pandemic, does that affect how we handle it now, or what we'll be
Oh
doing?
yeah, oh yeah, it certainly does. Now, to an extent, because disinfectants were so important for surface hygiene during the pandemic, it benefits us going into storm season, because this is not an industry that ramped down to nothing and shut down. This was an industry that actually amped up and improved its capabilities and its capacity. Certainly, there were supply problems, but going into storm season, this is an industry overall that's in very good shape. It's also an industry that improved in terms of quality. I think a lot of disinfectant manufacturers and a lot of contractors learned an awful lot about how to read an EPA label, how to understand EPA and Canadian labels, how to talk to the manufacturer about what they needed. And that led to manufacturers going back to EPA with amended labels. We just got back our newest label for the Benefect Decon 30, and we were able to add a lot of great new claims to it in terms of faster kill times, like COVID-2 in less than a minute, and some more organisms in less than 5, and greenhouse instructions for the horticultural industry, because we're getting a lot of interest from the folks who are in the cannabis business as that becomes ever more widespread. New York's probably going to go legal real soon. If they
Well, it's
haven't,
kind of legal here, just not legally being distributed and sold.
yeah, right.
You can possess it in New York, for just
New York's
making that
going to
point.
join. New York's going to join the family of states that have booming cannabis industries, which call for restoration contractors coming in and helping them out, because they're going to constantly get mold problems. So we've added some to the label there. We just got the word from our master registrant on the Shockwave product that we can use the emerging viral pathogens claim on the Shockwave. So there's a lot we've added, and there's a lot contractors have brought to the table. I will tell you, more people are now experienced using airless paint sprayers to apply disinfectants than ever before. That was something we learned from the Baptist Disaster Relief folks, our partners in the volunteer organizations active in disaster community, the VOAD community. And that's a great partnership Josh can talk about and I can fill in. But they were the first that I saw using paint sprayers to spray disinfectant after floods and storms to try and get as much area covered as quickly as possible as a prophylactic to stop mold before it got started. We took that same approach and taught folks how to use airless sprayers during the pandemic to do large public spaces that needed to be sanitized. And now we're coming full circle, bringing that back around to storm season. And now we have a lot of contractors who now appreciate and understand how useful that tool is. And whether it's Titan equipment or Graco equipment, we've got some great experience we can share in terms of technique that will maximize the coverage and also the performance.
So, I mean, that being said, so it's obviously some new techniques and maybe procedural ideas evolved from the pandemic. So you do see that translating it into the restoration side and the storm recovery side, dealing with these things?
If contractors who are the ones responding to the storm take the time to get education, there's a lot of great stuff to learn. It's a question of being disciplined enough in their businesses, take the time out to say, you know what, we need to be educated. We need to make sure that we've always got an educated person leading a particular project. So project supervisors or site supervisors, now is a great time to invest in education.
Yeah, but that's been a key point forever, though, hasn't it, Cole? I mean, in this industry, I mean, you could almost any factor of the indoor environmental industry has, maybe we've lagged a little overall as an industry, but certainly education seems paramount, right? I mean, that's
No
nothing new.
question. Nothing new. It's just that now we're in a singular position. What's different is we're coming off the pandemic and we learned a lot. So good educators are blending those lessons learned into what they were already teaching.
Mhm. Now, your organization focuses a lot on education aspects, which I don't know if that makes you an anomaly in the industry as far as a manufacturer, but it seems like that is a real focus. I mean, they have someone like you in that position of actually director of education, which
Yeah, having someone like me in this position is an investment and it's a commitment. And it's to ICP's credit that they believe in education, and not just education to train on product, but continuing education that's non-commercial, so that our customers can benefit from maintaining their accreditations in the industry. So whether it's continuing ed for AIHce, for which we have several courses registered, or AIA for the architects, or we just worked out at the hygiene show with the folks at ACGIH how to add ABIH credits for the certified industrial hygienists. We're trying to educate on multiple levels. But even if it's just as simple as having field people who can sit down with a group at a contractor's shop and walk them through the tips and tricks to be successful and the things to avoid that could get them hurt, that's a major step forward. So there's gradations of education. Not everyone is quite as sophisticated as ICP has become. But again, the key is for the contractor to be disciplined enough to seek education out, especially that they can get remotely now. We don't have to pay horrendous travel bills. Training on site and training in person, nothing replaces that interpersonal relationship and the relationships you develop by going to a class. But we have online resources that make education more practical in terms of time and money.
I mean, certainly the whole aspect of doing remote training, I think it's a lot more accepted now than it was, obviously pre-pandemic. Doing and online training doesn't necessarily have to be asynchronous. I think you're referring to a lot of stuff that would be recorded, but I mean,
Yep.
certainly there's a lot more of the university model distance learning where you're engaging like this, where you're seeing each other, and I would argue that that's probably almost as good as in-person training. It's a little harder. You can't do hands-on, or it's you have to be a lot more creative with that.
I'd agree. And I'll take the liberty of taking a plug. If people would go to icpmasterworkscommunity.com, that is the platform that I'm trying to build and grow out and crowdsource and manage all the time. We built that out originally to show recordings of some of our live classroom training and some of our live stream training webcasts like this one. We are now going to be expanding that capability so that people can go there, watch on demand, take a quick quiz, and get their credentials fulfilled that way. And that's really that digitalization is the direction that everything is going.
And
So
if I could jump in real quick too, Bob, one thing that Cole and I took away from the AIHA conference that we all saw each other at a few weeks ago is, because everybody's been locked up, if you will, for the last 2 or 3 years, the continuing education credits are at an all-time high as far as the need for folks like CIHs or CSPs. In order to maintain their CIH or CSP, they need to have a certain amount of credit hours in a certain time period. So, one thing Cole and I did at that conference was we went from booth to booth to all the environmental consultants, engineering firms that were present there, and offered up our services through Masterworks, whether or not it's live or pre-recorded, for them to gain some of those credits at the comfort of their own desk or in their conference room with their colleagues, to make sure that they've got the education as well as the continuing ed points that they would need.
I mean, the big thing is also being able to, translate this information and education into practical application, right? I mean, and I think that's, I know, Cole, you've been in the industry forever, and I don't mean that derogatorily because we're both kind of old, but you've had a lot of experience, and both of you actually, from the standpoint of people that are on the manufacturer product side. You guys also have spent time in the field. I mean, you have actual real
Yeah.
world knowledge, right?
And when it comes to storm season, real world knowledge is critical. We have taught courses on storm response, but it's really all about getting out there and interfacing with the contractor and understanding it might be the exact same product, disinfectant, cleaner, or wipe, whatever the case may be, or mold resistant coating or fungicidal coating, but the context is all different. The timetable is different. The demands are different. And frankly, we've always felt it's really important to cycle all of our people, as many as we possibly can, safely into an affected area almost as soon as pump out is done. Because after pump out completes and we've got drying and dehumidification and demolition, all of a sudden we're at the stage where these folks need the right disinfectant that has the right EPA or Public Health Canada registrations for stormwater, for black water, for sewage, for the types of organisms they're likely to encounter, for the types of surfaces they need to work on, hard, non-porous, or porous. So there's a in the field component that we've always been committed to. That if we get out and can make ourselves available, we can certainly help direct people to where our products are when they need them. But we can marry them up with the right tools and techniques. And it's a little different. It's definitely different in storms than we're used to in terms of pandemic response, where people were going in and detail cleaning and sanitizing office buildings or schools. Again, same disinfectant, very different dynamics.
Yeah, well, totally different application, right? Because when you have a Category 3 water loss and catastrophic flooding in a structure, that's a lot different than just doing detailed hygienic cleaning.
Yep.
The other thing that I think I think the general public tends to associate hurricane damage, flood damage. The first thought is mold. I think in the general consumer's mind, but that's not the most immediate threat, obviously, from
Right.
these floodings, chemicals, pathogens. All mold is a subsequent problem. But what do we need to be worried about when there's a flood?
Yeah, mold is down the road. One of the most heartbreaking things we see after storms are the almost inevitable yet preventable newspaper stories about residents trying to do their own flood clean out, or even experienced contractors who contract necrotic fasciitis or one of the flesh-eating bacteria. Utterly preventable exposures, but people need to realize that stormwater, first of all, seawater is black water, and that a lot of people need to remember that seawater is Category 3 water. Water that stands around for any length of time is contaminated. Sewage from both animals and people, in the list of threats goes on and on. People need to take precautions. One of the things people need to do is have the right disinfecting system set up for their personal protective equipment. Not all disinfectants can be used for PPE. And we need to look carefully at what wipes we're using, because wipes are the kind of thing that make it easy for our workers to sanitize their PPE. And if you don't make it convenient, they won't do it. And now their health is at risk. So just thinking about simple things like wipes and how they're integrated into your operations. Are you going to use wipes to do a whole, wall of studs? No, no, but there's a role for those, and there's a role for the liquid products, and for sprayers and foamers and pump ups and all the tools in the toolbox.
That's a great. The wipes are a great point though, because I want to step back on that because there's different types of wipes. There's wipes for cleaning surfaces and disinfecting surfaces, and the sanitizing wipes for your PPE. It has to be stuff that can have skin contact and
Right.
whole different genre of products, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And you need to also understand that wipes only go so far. Don't overuse it. Your typical wipe might do half a square foot to a square foot, whereas some of the so-called premium products, ours among them, can do 2 to 3 square feet, which is, of course, percentage-wise, an enormous jump in capability. But it still means that these are tools with limited applicability. You don't try and do a large surface area with wipes, but you can't not have the wipes either. They've got to be part of your kit.
And
that makes
Bob,
total sense.
another highlight too that is often overlooked is the asbestos and lead factor after a storm. Many folks just zero in and focus on mold and water intrusion and start ripping out walls and spaces that are contaminated with asbestos and or lead. So it's also very important when any of that demo happens to make sure there's asbestos and lead surveys done prior to that.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point you're making there, Josh, because again, we're dealing with historic building stock, and I think Cole and I had this discussion, and he published an article a while back on just the amount of legacy asbestos that remains in buildings in the United States, and I was horrified at those numbers. I actually did believe that maybe 70+% of it had been cleaned up already and abated, and we're not there, are we?
No, the most optimistic numbers we see is that 70% of the legacy is still out there. Exactly the opposite of what you're seeing. In fact, I would wager it's more like 10% has been addressed, and we still have 90% to go. Just this morning, I was talking with, very confidentially, with one of the big distribution companies. And they'd gone back and done some research and pretty much found out that their sales with abatement, specifically asbestos and lead, over the past 20 years were actually year over year almost exactly the same. So this is not a declining industry. This is actually a very healthy, thriving industry. Is it sexy? No. Lead and asbestos aren't sexy, but they're stable and they're not going anywhere. And there's a labyrinthine set of regulations that restoration contractors have to deal with. So what you're referring to is the January article I'd written, which really just encourages, almost in desperation, the restoration contractor, hey, look at this, make this part of your service offering, understand how this works. Don't keep burying your head in the sand saying, I'm a restoration contractor, not an abatement contractor. The lines have blurred, folks. They've been blurring since 2008, since the Great Recession, when everyone was suddenly considering, how do I diversify my business? Well, if you haven't diversified and bolted on some of these environmental services now is the time. And storm season means moments of urgency where you're going to wish you'd done it.
I mean, the line should have blurred a lot sooner, to be honest. People got into the mold industry, and it's like, oh, we don't do asbestos line, we just do mold. It's like, yeah, okay, except that you're disturbing building materials that probably have ACM and lead-based paint products.
Right.
So it's not a new thing. It's just that maybe people are more cognizant of it.
Yeah. One other thing I think that needs to be borne in mind is fire season. You mentioned, things, we're developing things and we're becoming more aware. I think we're all a lot more aware of fire season and the amount of fire that we're dealing with. Well, fire season places stress on storm season. Fire season depletes resources that otherwise would be available for storm season, either in the form of contractors who can respond, or adjusters who can respond, or consulting professionals who can handle, massive losses, even disinfectants. We've talked for years and taught for years, clean it, kill it, and coat it. That's always been our mantra: clean, kill, coat. And that actually was born out of water damage and mold, and is very applicable to storm, especially because, the clean and kill doesn't prevent that mold from coming back in these structures that are cleaned up and no longer buttoned up and no longer conditioned, especially in these hot, humid Gulf Coast environments. But we also use disinfectant after fire. We board up, the mold goes crazy, and we've got to clean that out. So the tougher and nastier the fire season is, and we had fires in Colorado on New Year's Eve this year. But for the most part, fire season is at its height in July, August, September, and it just extends longer than it used to. And that's peak storm season too. So those mutually stressing factors are going to take their toll, which is yet another argument for be prepared, have inventory. These are not materials that spoil in a week. So you can be strategic and logistical in how you deploy your cleaning and disinfecting chemistry, as well as having your inhibition, your preventative products, your coatings, your fungicidal coatings and mold resistant coatings ready to discuss with your client and ready to go if that's what they want to do.
And fire, I guess, clarify too, the fire season, I think we typically tend to think of it as being a West Coast issue. But is that necessarily the case anymore?
No. I mean, the fires that are colossal, that are national, nightly newsworthy, are still, for the most part, out west. But there's a lot of fire in Texas. There's a lot of fire on the plains. Grassland fire can do an awful lot of damage. And we're not just talking about fire that finds its way into communities and burns homes, although that's definitely the case. More construction takes place in what we call the WUI, the wildland urban interface, now than in any other part of the country. So there's a lot of construction going on in the WUI, and we're putting ourselves in the way of fire. We're putting ourselves in the path of fire because that's where we're building now. But even grassland fire, produces a ton of ash, a ton of combustion particulate. And credit to the AIHce for putting a lot of effort into Brad Kovar's committee that's developing the AIHce S760, which is going to be the new wildfire standard, and which is really coming along quickly. And it's going to be really exciting to see how that changes the industry, because it's going to help us design training courses. It's going to help us standardize operations so that people understand what really needs to be done. For example, when there's a wildfire, usually the HVAC system isn't shut off right away. So we get a massive amount of contamination in the ductwork, contamination from sap and softwood that is very sticky, very cold, and very difficult to remove. And has the opposite pH of what you expect with fire damage. So you need to clean it differently. And you almost always need to offer your client or consider sealers, because there will be a lot of non-removable particulate that otherwise can eventually get into the airstream. So the wildfire dynamic is more than just out west. There's a lot of fire on the East Coast. There's fires every year in Maine, where my family's from. And it's just not reported on as much because it's ordinary. But
because the scope, right? The scale of those fires are not as large as some of the massive things we're seeing on the West Coast.
Exactly. But it can happen. In 1947, half the state of Maine burned. It was a massive natural disaster that no one remembers today, nor should they, I guess. I mean, it's a long time ago. But it happens, and it's because of climate change. It's going to happen more and more frequently. We're also going to see demand when it comes to mold and disinfectants from the contracting community. General contractors around the East Coast, up and down the eastern half of the country, are noticing they're getting less and less buildable days. They're getting more and more days with rain this time of year, May, June, July. And what that means is those structures that are not yet weather tight are going to grow mold. Mm-hmm. And so there's going to be more demand for professionals to either work directly for those general contractors. And a lot of general contractors are hiring restoration professionals to be an in-house team rather than contracting it out.
Sure.
But that is going to be, another demand at the same time of year as fire season and storm season.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there needs to be a paradigm shift to some extent, though. I think in the general contracting, construction industry, as far as the way they stage the order of operations, and especially here, I can speak to the Northeast pretty heavy. You see a lot of I'm going to say mismanaged, because that's the only way I can describe it as a consultant going out there. They have a mold problem on a stick frame construction building. Why do they have that? Well, because they left a lot of their materials sitting out in the water, letting them get rained on. They didn't have the building dried in anywhere near when they should have, and they already started doing finish work on the inside when there was still literally windows not even installed in the building. And
that's right.
That mindset has to change.
It has to change. The lumber is green. The wood is wet. I mean, the list goes on and on. Well, that's why we're here to help. So.
Yeah, well, and I think that's really important, and I could speak, to that directly, Cole, with, years ago, because I'm a contractor in the industry, or have been, and, just the support, Fiberlock, and you with Fiberlock gave us, when we had some technical issues out in the field, and I've never had that type of support in any other company I've ever worked with, to be honest. From a vendor, I was astonished and pleasantly surprised. Say the least.
Yep, that's one thing we do. We do have a lot of boots on the ground, if you will, throughout the U.S. and Canada. Under the ICP Building Solutions Group umbrella, the Fiberlock and Benefect teams are both under the Environmental Restoration Group. And we've got coast to coast covered. As Cole mentioned earlier, when any of these storms happen, our guys are some of the first ones in when it's safe to come in, work with our local distributors in the area, as well as the local contractors, going job to job, helping them with projects. If there's a scope of work that needs to be detailed, helping them with that, as well as showing them where our products are in those storm areas, and helping deliver them sometimes from the distributors. So we definitely have a great team, and are very proud of the guys.
So take a little bit of a different tack here. In our pre-show, Cole, you mentioned, just the efforts of volunteer organizations after hurricanes to get back into. Well, I mean, we're talking not just hurricanes, we're talking natural disasters, because obviously volunteer organizations would come into play with catastrophic flooding, or also the aftermath of large fires, right? I mean,
that's right.
Either way.
Right. We've got a very special relationship that we treasure with the folks from Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, with their Send Relief organization. And that relationship goes back to 2005, right after Katrina, when we started working with each other. They can deliver 60 to 70,000 trained volunteers and hundreds of vehicles that do everything from feeding thousands meals to childcare. But they also have crews who are trained to do what they call muckouts. And a muckout is when they get to a property and they are prepared and trained sufficiently that they can go in there and stabilize the situation. And that involves removing a lot of the residues, the filth, the accumulated muds and all that that have arrived with the flood or the hurricane. They also do work after forest fires called ash out. And that involves a lot of removing the ash and the soot, as well as helping look for personal belongings in the rubble. But muckouts are where we work a lot with Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, and actually I'm very grateful. We've been one of the few, if only, outside folks to be invited to their national conference, their National Disaster Relief Conference, strictly to teach, to educate on disinfectants. And they are, we donate a lot of product as well, donate a lot, pallets and pallets of Shockwave in the aftermath of the large natural disasters. There are other organizations we work with as well. In fact, we work with probably a solid dozen of them. But I, would say that the Send Relief folks from Southern Baptist Disaster Relief make the greatest investment that I've seen thus far in education to make sure that their volunteers are effective and safe, and that they know what they're doing, and that everything's written down when they arrive. One of the things I think has been the case in the past, and this was something we discussed when we invited them to visit the Property Insurance Restoration Conference, which unfortunately the PIRC, which didn't survive the pandemic, but was a great, multi 3 times a year event. Hopefully it comes back. But what we noticed was a lot of the big franchise networks and a lot of the big response contractors did not have any connection with the volunteers organization active in disaster, VOADs, VOAD, and almost considered them to be competitors. And they're not. They're not
That's
competitors at all.
Yeah.
There was actually some genuine hostility between the two communities, which was really just born out of a lack of understanding and awareness as to what each of them do. And each plays a different role. So it was pretty darn gratifying to be part of bridging that gap and trying to bring those communities closer together and introduce them to one another, so they had people they could communicate with. The volunteers are impressive, and there are of course many gradations. There are some folks who show up on disaster sites with pickup trucks ready to haul away mattresses and have no idea what they're doing and actually end up hurting themselves. But on the other hand, there are some organizations that are remarkably professional and have their procedures down. They've been doing this for decades. So I would love to see that process where the volunteer organizations and the professional storm response community continue to come together, because I think they could really benefit each other.
I mean, do you see that happening, more readily? Because I could
happening.
also see how the professional community could also see them as maybe costing them dollars. I'm
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
and for the most part, the folks that the disaster relief folks are helping are homeowners in their homes, and they're not large commercial buildings. They're not universities. They're not colleges.
They focus on people who don't have insurance.
Right. So they really are there to help those that have no other way to fix the problem, monetarily or labor.
So they're not really viable customers.
No, not really. And for the most part, many of those large contractors do some residential work, but for the most part, when they come into these storm affected areas, they're looking for the hotels, the universities, and the Walmarts, the Targets, etc., to get that infrastructure back open, dry and safe, and not so much Mr. and Mrs. Smith's house. So that's where disaster relief comes into play. And my first experience with them, I was literally amazed. I think it was Cole and I and one of our guys, John Alvarez, based out of Florida. We were working the storm that came into the Carolinas, in North Carolina, and just to see how organized they were, basically everything from taking care of children with childcare, setting up feeding stations to help people with hot meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, setting up showering areas, places for people to sleep and stay in churches that were not affected. It was amazing to see how many people came together. And like Cole said, how they have it so organized. I mean, they literally have a scope of work that each one of these guys, goes around with in a 3-ring binder of how to tackle each problem, down to cleaning, disinfecting, using coatings, etc.
And in the off season, they train. It's remarkable what they do, and they stay. And I was just talking to one of their principals last week, and he said they still have crews actively working after Ida.
Really?
Yeah, they're still there because people still need help.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think you pointed out to it. There's a large sector of the general public, right? The homeowners and tenants and renters that don't have the resources to do this work, and they're just kind of left by the wayside.
Yep. So if our restoration contractors are more comfortable with, because they get those folks, asking them, hey, will you work on my property? This is a place where the restoration professional can, guide the desperate property owner in the right direction. Say, no, we may not be able to help you, but here's an organization that can.
And where would somebody find more information on these organizations? Is there, I mean, we can certainly get some liner notes from you guys and put them in the show with the show, but
Yeah, we can do that. And, most states have an emergency preparedness program. They have an emergency management program. And a lot of these volunteer organizations serve on those programs. They are part of the phone tree and part of the committee, part of the network. So the volunteer organizations active in disaster actually, I believe, have their own organization, VOAD. So you can go, I think, I haven't done it in a while, but I think you can go to voad.org and find a lot of them listed there. But you can list by your state too. Like I would do Massachusetts VOAD, and I think I can get some great online resources that way. Certainly, Send Relief is one of the largest in terms of national scope, in terms of all 50 U.S. states and the Canadian provinces, in terms of having crews ready to go. And down in the Storm Alley and Tornado Alley states, those crews that are ready to deploy almost in a day or two's notice are very robust.
So I take a little switch again. IACRC, you spoke about it briefly. That organization obviously has created standards for a lot of aspects of the indoor environmental industry. S520 being the mold standard is currently in revision, right? And you're participating in that committee, correct?
I have been since 2002.
Yeah,
so
see?
This is my 20th year with 520.
So where are we at with that? Is that, I mean, I keep hearing that we're going to see it soon.
So 4.5 years later, since we started the most recent revision, and these are ANSI standards. They're American International Standards Institute, so they're internationally recognized, which also means they have to be maintained and curated in certain ways to maintain their validity and their legal standing. You're supposed to revise them every 5 years. So we started the revision process 4.5 years ago, thinking it would be a year, and here we are 4.5 years later. So it's been a long, hard slog. But we finished the actual writing at the AIHce Standard Summit in Las Vegas the first weekend of March. And we are working on now fixing some of the internal inconsistencies, working on the references, the glossary, and making sure that the different parts of the document agree with each other. And then from there, it will go to IICRC, to legal, to editing, and hopefully in the not too distant future to publication. I'm hesitant to predict how many months away it is, but it is months, not years. And hopefully it's only a few months. We might even have a document by late in storm season. Certainly, I think the professionals in this industry can count on, as we go from calendar year 22 into 23, once the standard's out, that'll affect how everybody does training. And that'll result in a lot of retraining. So be prepared to have your folks get educated on what's different. It's going to be a really good time to do refresher mold training and refresher water damage training when the new document comes out, because that is the document that the lawyers look at, that the insurance companies look at, that the government looks at. It's not just our little guideline in our industry. It affects a lot about how we do it, and how we get paid.
Should we be expecting any monumental changes? I mean, really, I know you probably can't let the cat out of the bag, it's not finalized, but big paradigm shifts, anything coming that we should be excited about or scared of?
I think there's some good clarifications about what condition 1, 2, and 3 are, and what normal fungal ecology is. Personally, I'm a specialist in the chemistry and the coatings and the cleaners and the disinfectants. So I'm very close to that language, and I think we made some remarkable improvements. Unfortunately, as the industry, the water damage and mold industry has gone on and grown, we are seeing, and not at all unpredictably, we're seeing a sort of insurgency of blow and go, spray and pray applicators and manufacturers who are encouraging that type of magical, silver potion product. And one of the guardians at the gate is the 520 document, in that it makes clear in a consensus document that no, we do need to clean. As Howie Wolf always said, it was the missing step. We forget what we get paid for, and that is to remove the contamination. And everything else we do is useful and complementary. And so the document is stronger on its feet in those areas. Not that it wasn't already, but it's better now.
Well,
And
but there were
it's
certainly weaknesses. I mean, let's face it, the industry since the mold rush of 2000, right? I mean,
yeah.
there's the magic silver bullet potions have been, people have been hawking that stuff forever.
And it's been particularly bad lately, and the pandemic made it worse.
Sure.
Yeah.
Everyone during the pandemic wanted, something that could make everything better in a snap. So
and protect their surfaces for up to 6 months.
Right.
Yeah, the problem is they didn't really understand how the transmission was happening with SARS-CoV-2. I mean, that's another story.
Well, yeah,
I mean, go there.
And you know what, Bob? I would say let's do that story sometime, because I followed that all the way through, and I think it's a really, really fascinating story about regulation and the media and how different pieces get picked up upon.
Sure.
But I think we all know that mold is an area where we're especially susceptible to people making promises that these products are going to solve all their problems instantly, and that none of the elbow grease is going to be necessary and none of the disruption is going to be necessary. And that's just not true. To get at the circumstances that led to the mold, the moisture problem, there's going to be some disruption. Drilling holes in sheetrock and flooding wall cavities with magic products and telling everyone that your home has been made better. It sounds ridiculous in an interview context like this, but it's exactly what people want to believe when they're desperate.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, mold is a symptom. I always say this when I'm training too. Mold is a symptom. The problem is moisture problem, right? There was a sudden occurrence, or there's an ongoing, building dynamic issue that's happening there. So if you're not dealing with the source of the problem is the moisture problem in the indoor environment, and you have to deal with that.
And after storms, we see that all the time. There's a rush to build back up. And if we don't address the moisture issues, if we don't make sure that we're moving ahead with a, as clean as possible environment, then the chances of downstream consequences become, greatly enhanced.
So you also mentioned IIHce's forthcoming fire standard. And that is, which document is that?
Well, there's two, actually.
Okay.
It's remarkable to think that the natural disasters, or not natural, the disasters that birthed the restoration industry were the great urban fires of the 19th century. Whether it was Charleston, where Josh is, or New York City, or Boston, or Chicago, of course, and Mrs. O'Leary's cow. What originally led to insurance restoration was city and state governments knowing that after these devastating fires, there's no way they could pay. There's no way they could, have those resources to get a city back on its feet. But despite how long we've been dealing with fire, there's never been a standard. There's been a guideline that we've had in RIA, that RIA has been the custodian of for 20 some years, and it's a good document. But we've never actually had an ANSI accredited standard. And as I mentioned earlier, standards are important because they are the best practice document that prudent professionals should be expected to follow. And they are what are used by courts of law and by the insurance companies, and they determine how we do things, get paid. So how amazing is it that it's taken us well over a century to finally get a standard out? And the standard that's coming is the S700, is the structural fire standard, which that group has been working hard since they took over that standard from IAQA and ASHRAE. And I did a lot of work on the language when it was still an IAQA ASHRAE document. A lot of that carried over. That document's also getting close to coming out. So there are two fire standards. There's the 700, which is structural fire, and then the 760, which is wildfire.
And when were you going to see those? I mean,
the way wildfire is going, I'd love to say end of year. Um, 700, I thought we would have seen, or at least seen it much closer. So there seems to be a bit of a slowdown, but maybe I'm just not, in the loop. Um, I don't get the feeling that it's coming out tomorrow. I think we're also still looking in multiple months, but it has to be close. So this could be really, an exciting year in restoration if we're all trying to digest a new mold standard, a new water standard that we just got this past year, and 2 new fire standards, as well as the health and safety guides that are getting close to publication. So we could be looking at an avalanche of content to digest all at once.
And a very busy year for trainers. Good opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. It seems like, they go hand in hand, right? If new standards require re-educating.
Yep.
So
there will be a lot of classes to choose from. So consider who your gurus are. It's like everything else in life. We're all successful by knowing who to call and ask those tough questions.
Sure. It does look like there's a lot of new stuff on the horizon. It's exciting. It's an exciting time. We're coming off this pandemic, and I say we're coming off because it's not over yet, but at least we're, I guess we're on the waning stages of it. At least it appears to be. Do you see going forward from both of your perspectives in the industry on the manufacturer side and and on the side of actually selling products that are used in the industry, has there been a paradigm shift? I mean, or do you think the people are generally more interested in improving indoor environmental conditions, or at least more attuned to it since the pandemic? And is that something that's going to be short-lived because we have short attention spans, and in this country especially, or is that you think there's going to actually be a substantive change moving forward?
Well, there's been a lot of money. There's been a lot of money devoted to ventilation, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think improving ventilation, especially in schools and other public settings, is long overdue. I think everybody would agree with that. I think expecting ventilation to solve public transmission problems of epidemic and pandemic disease is again wishing on a star. So the best way to look at I think that we've all learned the best way to look at controlling outbreaks, epidemic and pandemic, is the solution's got to be multifaceted. Sure, social distancing, absolutely, surface transmission, the right, whether or not to mask, and if so, with what. Ventilation is very, very important. Air exchanges and fresh air. All of these things have to work together to effectively control a situation. And one of the things I've been traveling around teaching is I like to call it SHEP, Surface Hygiene Epidemic and Pandemic. It's one of the programs we offer, which talks about, we may be on the waning days of the pandemic, but it's made us acutely aware that there are epidemics, there are outbreaks all the time. There are communities that have measles outbreaks, or community-acquired MRSA, or meningitis. And a lot in those situations, in those communities, people will turn, whether they're in government or facilities management, to the local restoration contractor and say, I've got a problem. I've got a hockey team that's got a MRSA outbreak. I need to make sure my environment for these people is cleaned and sanitized and maintained such that that epidemic will recede. So having a SHEP capability, I think, is a smart play for any restorer who considers themselves the leader in their local community, because every community in North America, I don't want to speak for the whole world, but every community in North America is going to experience an outbreak of something.
Sure.
And so the restoration contractor is who people turn to. So it would be a real crying shame if the lessons we learned about how to use our skills and apply them to pandemic are forgotten. We need to retain the lessons learned, incorporate them into work practices, so that when we're called upon to respond in our individual community, we're ready.
But isn't that the key point, though, Cole? Because it would be a shame, but we have a tendency to do that.
Yes, we do.
We do have a tendency to be very short-memoried when it comes to these things. How do
Yeah.
we what do we do different this time so that we actually affect positive change?
Well, we capture as much of what we've learned into the standard operating procedures that are ready to make actionable as soon as possible. And that needs to be done in the building owner and management community, but it also needs to be done by the restoration contractor. Now is the time to, and if you need to work with partners like ICP, as I mentioned, we have a program, the SHEP program, and there are others like that out there where we can say, let's put it down in writing. Let's put it up on your website. Let's have a page on your website that talks about what you can do in terms of outbreak and epidemic. And let's make sure that we've got a training schedule so that we do a refresher, once a year. If for a lot of these folks who are already doing biohazard and who are doing trauma scene, who are doing illicit labs, clandestine meth, that sort of thing, those people really have a lot of the same skills that are ready to go. So it's a question of capturing that and distilling it down as part of your service offering, so that every time you're in front of a client as a restoration professional, whether it's consulting or actually executing, doing the contamination work, there is a bullet list of services that are offered that's backed up by standard operating procedures or even architectural specifications. So that's how we capture it now while it's fresh, and how we maintain it as a both a service to the community that's desperately needed, as well as a source of revenue that sustains the restoration professional in the future.
So we are coming up on the bewitching hour. I'm going to let each of you have a short, final point, final thoughts. I'm going to end up going to Josh first, and then we'll come back to you, Cole, and yeah, we'll wrap this one up.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. Really appreciate you having us on. It was great to see you a few weeks ago at the AIHce Conference in Nashville, where these all kind of culminated together, and the reason for Cole and I being on here. So just want to remind everybody, given the time of year, here we are in the second week of June. Hurricane season is upon us. At ICP, under the Building Solutions Group, as I mentioned earlier, we have both the FiberLock and the BedEffect brands, both of which are in our Clean Kill Coat system for not only water restoration, also fire, smoke damage. Please reach out to anybody at the ICP team or your local distributor who you purchase products from and inquire about our products. And we'll look for those of you who chase storms out in the field, and we'll have boots on the ground throughout the summer and fall.
Cole, I'll pass it over to you.
So, Bob, first of all, thank you for having us on. Healthy Indoors and the portals like this to communicate valuable knowledge across the restoration community and the environmental community and the abatement community. They're invaluable, and there aren't enough of them. So what you do, please keep doing it. And the more we can support what you're doing and contribute, we're happy to do it. I am an education person. And so we mentioned earlier in this broadcast how important education is, how it's always been important to improve what we do, but how it's transcendently important this year, coming off the pandemic, with the fire and storm season and climatic changes and all the demands they're placing on the restoration industry overall. If we can all remember the whole idea of clean it, kill it, and coat it, and how that helps us think through how we intelligently use cleaners and disinfectants and resistant coatings and smoke sealers and fungicidal coatings and all that, then we will improve our performance immeasurably, because the chemicals and coatings that we use are useful and complementary tools to our primary task of removing the source contamination. Please get education. Please reach out. There's education on infection control and on communicable disease. There's education on what to do after a storm. There's education on lead and asbestos, which we mentioned. And a lot of it's free. And a lot of it can even help you maintain your AIHce certifications and other industry community certifications. Go to icpmasterworkscommunity.com. That's our company name, ICP, Innovative Chemical Products, and then masterworkscommunity.com. And browse what we have there, reach out to our subject matter experts, look at our editorial calendar, and review some of the training we've done in the past, and let us know what you need. And we're a crowdsourced platform, so if there's something you need that you haven't seen up to this point, let us know. Maybe it's something we can accommodate rather easily. But Bob, thank you very, very much for having us on.
Our pleasure. I think it was really timely, and I'm happy, Josh, both of you, that we had the opportunity to get together in Nashville and brainstorm out this debut show for the season. I think it was really timely and super educational. And reality is, both of you gentlemen have got just a massive amount of industry experience and knowledge. So it's just always a pleasure to speak to both of you. So yeah, we are at that time now. So first off, I just want to remind y'all, we're coming to you live with a Healthy Indoors show. Of course, we're based on a lot of areas. We're a multimedia company. Healthyindoors.com is our mothership, I would say, for the most part, where you can see the latest incarnations of Healthy Indoors magazine, which I'll bring up. We actually, interestingly enough, this is one of the few times that we've actually had the show come on at the same time that we're releasing the latest issue of the magazine. And this is it. That's what it looks like. We were actually live from Finland this morning with the magazine, so that was interesting. But we also are live streaming now to you from our Healthy Indoors online global community platform, which I think is really important. If you haven't seen it yet, it's something you definitely should take a look at. The online community is a platform that allows you to kind of get in the whole world of indoor environmental issues. I'm reluctant to compare it to Facebook and LinkedIn, but if you could imagine a LinkedIn or Facebook that's totally indoor environmentally centric, tons of content, but more importantly, an opportunity to network with people in the industry from other disciplines all over the world. So this is it's a great opportunity for you to take a look at that and get involved with it. So again, for both Josh and Cole, it's been great having you guys here. We'll be back again next week, same bat time, same bat channel, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, for the Healthy Indoors show. Until then, I'm the founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors magazine, Bob Krell. I wish you all well, and I hope everyone stays happy and healthy. So we'll see you soon.